My name is Emily Carter, and for most of my life, I believed that if I worked hard enough, loved deeply enough, and stayed patient long enough, my family would eventually see my worth. I was wrong. The truth is, some people are born into families where love feels effortless. They grow up surrounded by encouragement, support, and equal affection. I wasn't one of those people. Growing up, there were always two versions of reality inside our house. There was the reality everyone else saw. And then there was the reality I lived. From the outside, we looked like a normal family. My father, Richard, owned a small but successful construction company. My mother, Linda, worked part-time at a local real estate office. We lived in a comfortable suburban neighborhood with neatly trimmed lawns and friendly neighbors. And then there were my sister and me. I was the older daughter. Sophie was younger by 2 years. To strangers, we probably looked inseparable. But inside our home, we occupied very different places. I learned that lesson earlier than most children should. One afternoon when I was 8 years old, my mother had left a freshly baked apple pie cooling on the kitchen counter. She specifically told both of us not to touch it. The smell filled the entire house. Hours later, when she returned to the kitchen, half the pie was gone. My mother immediately demanded to know what happened. Before I could even react, Sophie pointed directly at me. "Emily ate it." I stared at her. "What?" "No, I didn't." My mother crossed her arms. "Emily, I specifically told you not to touch it." "I didn't." "Stop arguing." I felt my face burn. Sophie did it. But my sister simply widened her eyes and shook her head. My mother didn't ask any more questions. She didn't investigate. She didn't wonder why crumbs were still stuck to Sophie's shirt. Instead, I was grounded for an entire week. That night, I cried alone in my bedroom. Not because of the punishment. Because I realized something important. Nobody believed me. And that became a pattern. Whenever something went wrong, I was questioned first. Whenever Sophie made mistakes, excuses appeared instantly. If Sophie forgot her homework, she was overwhelmed. If I forgot mine, I was irresponsible. If Sophie got a B on a test, my parents celebrated her effort. If I got a B, they asked what happened. Nothing I did ever seemed enough. Meanwhile, everything Sophie did seemed worthy of praise. As the years passed, the difference became impossible to ignore. At family gatherings, relatives often commented on how polite and hardworking I was. I secretly hoped my parents would agree. Instead, my mother would smile and say things like, "Emily has always been independent." At first, that sounded like a compliment. Eventually, I understood what it really meant. It meant they expected me to take care of myself. All their energy went to Sophie. When I turned 14, I joined the debate team. I practiced for months. I spent weekends preparing arguments and studying topics while my friends went to parties. When the state championship finally arrived, I finished first. I remember standing on stage holding a trophy almost as tall as my waist. The audience applauded. Teachers congratulated me. Even complete strangers shook my hand. I scanned the crowd looking for my parents. They weren't there. Later that evening, they apologized. Apparently Sophie had wanted to go shopping. They said they would attend my next competition. They never did. At 16, I earned a scholarship to a prestigious summer academic program. At 17, I graduated near the top of my class. At 18, I received acceptance letters from several universities. Each accomplishment earned a brief smile. A quick congratulations. Then life moved on. But whenever Sophie achieved something ordinary, it became a celebration. A dinner. A party. A family announcement. It was difficult not to notice. even more difficult not to resent. Yet there was one person who always made me feel seen. My grandmother. Margaret Carter. To everyone else, she was simply Grandma. To me, she was everything. She lived alone in a charming white house surrounded by flowers and old oak trees. Every Saturday, I visited her. Those afternoons became the happiest part of my childhood. While my parents focused on Sophie, Grandma focused on me. She listened. She remembered details. She asked questions and actually cared about the answers. When I talked about school, she listened. When I talked about my dreams, she encouraged them. When I talked about feeling invisible, she never dismissed my feelings. Instead, she would squeeze my hand and remind me of something important. Your value doesn't depend on whether other people recognize it. At the time, I didn't fully understand what she meant. I only knew that being around her made life easier. As I grew older, our bond became even stronger. Some weekends we baked cookies together. Other weekends we sat on the porch for hours discussing books, movies, and life. She taught me patience. She taught me resilience. Most importantly, she taught me that kindness and strength could exist together. One evening, shortly after my 19th birthday, we were sitting on her porch watching the sunset. The sky glowed orange and pink across the horizon. Grandma looked unusually thoughtful. After several minutes of silence, she spoke. "Emily, promise me something." "What is it?" "No matter what happens, don't let bitterness define your future." I smiled. "That's oddly specific." She laughed softly. "Life has a way of testing people." I didn't think much about the comment at the time. But years later, those words would echo in my mind. After college, I built a successful career in corporate finance that I worked hard. Long hours. Late nights. Endless deadlines. But for the first time in my life, my achievements actually mattered. People respected me. They valued my work. They listened when I spoke. Meanwhile, Sophie's life followed a different path. She bounced between jobs. She quit whenever responsibilities became inconvenient. And every time she ran into trouble, my parents rescued her. Rent payments. Car repairs. Credit card debt. There was always another emergency. Always another excuse. And always another check from Mom and Dad. I stopped arguing years ago. Nothing ever changed. Then came the phone call I had always feared. Grandma had suffered a severe stroke. I rushed to the hospital immediately. For several days, doctors remained cautiously optimistic. But deep down, I knew things were different. When I held her hand, she squeezed mine weakly. Her smile remained. But the strength that had carried her through life seemed to be fading. 3 months later, she passed away peacefully in her sleep. The loss shattered me. For days, I moved through life in a haze. The woman who had been my biggest supporter was gone. At her funeral, hundreds of people came to pay their respects. Every seat was filled. People shared stories about her kindness, generosity, and wisdom. Listening to them, I realized something. Grandma had touched countless lives. Not because she was wealthy. Because she genuinely cared about people. A week after the funeral, our family gathered at a law office for the reading of her will. Honestly, inheritance wasn't on my mind. I wasn't expecting anything significant. I simply wanted closure. The lawyer began reading. Several personal items were distributed among relatives. Jewelry. Family photographs. Antique furniture. Small gifts carrying sentimental value. Everything seemed normal. Then the lawyer reached the final section. The room became quiet. He had just his glasses and continued reading. The remainder of the estate, including the family residence, investment accounts, savings, and all remaining assets shall be divided equally between my granddaughters, Emily Carter and Sophie Carter. For a moment, nobody spoke. I blinked. Surely I had misheard. The lawyer repeated the statement. Equally. Everything would be split equally. According to later estimates, the estate was worth nearly $2 million. My heart raced. Not because of the money. Because I suddenly understood something. Grandma had known. She had seen the imbalance that existed within our family. And even after her death, she was trying to make things right. I looked across the room. My father appeared stunned. My mother looked uncomfortable. But Sophie looked furious. The expression disappeared almost instantly. Most people probably missed it. I didn't. Because I had spent my entire life watching her. And in that brief moment, I saw something dangerous behind her smile. Something calculating. Something cold. It lasted only a second. Then she composed herself and congratulated me. But a strange feeling settled in my stomach. A feeling I couldn't explain. As we left the law office, I glanced back at the conference room one last time. I thought the hardest part of losing Grandma was over. I thought her final gift would bring our family closer together. I thought the future was finally beginning to look fair. I had no idea that the real nightmare was only beginning. For the first few weeks after Grandma's will was read, everything appeared normal. At least on the surface. Sophie congratulated me. My parents acted polite. And every time we spoke about the inheritance, everyone agreed that Grandma's wishes should be respected. I wanted to believe them. After all, Grandma had made her decision very clear. The estate would be divided equally between her two granddaughters. There was nothing ambiguous about it. Nothing to debate. Nothing to interpret. Or so I thought. What I didn't know was that while I was trying to move forward with my life, Sophie had already begun working behind the scenes. The first sign came from an unexpected phone call. About a month after the reading of the will, I received a call from the law office handling Grandma's estate. The assistant informed me that some paperwork was being reviewed and that the distribution process might take slightly longer than expected. I wasn't concerned. Legal matters often took time. I thanked her and went back to work. But as the weeks passed, more delays appeared. Then more questions. Then more requests for documentation. Everything suddenly felt complicated. One afternoon, I decided to call the attorney directly. His secretary informed me he was unavailable. Again. The following week, he was unavailable again. Something felt wrong. Very wrong. Then one evening, I received a call from my mother. Her voice sounded unusually cold. "Emily, we need to talk." I immediately knew something was wrong. When I arrived at my parents' house, Sophie was already there. So was my father. Nobody smiled. Nobody offered me coffee, nobody asked how I was doing. The atmosphere felt like an interrogation. My father folded his arms. My mother stared at me. And Sophie sat quietly in the corner. For several uncomfortable seconds, nobody spoke. Then my mother finally broke the silence. "Is there something you want to tell us?" I frowned. "What are you talking about?" My father's expression hardened. "The lawyer informed us about the documents." My stomach tightened. "What documents?" Sophie looked down dramatically. As if she were hurt. As if she were the victim. My mother slid a folder across the table. "These documents." Confused, I opened it. Inside were several photocopied pages. At first, I didn't understand what I was seeing. Then my blood ran cold. The documents appeared to show private correspondence between me and Grandma. Letters. Signed statements. Notes. All supposedly proving that Grandma had changed her mind before her death. According to those papers, Grandma had intended to leave nearly everything to me. But I had supposedly convinced her not to update the official will. I stared at the pages. My hands shook. This is fake. Nobody responded. I looked around the room. My parents avoided eye contact. Only Sophie seemed calm. Far too calm. This isn't real, I repeated. Someone forged these. My father slammed his hand against the table. Enough. The sudden outburst startled me. I am tired of hearing excuses. Excuses. I said. These documents are fake. My mother sighed heavily. Emily, we've always known you were ambitious. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. What does that even mean? It means, my father said, that maybe money changed you. For a moment, I honestly wondered whether I was dreaming. The conversation felt insane. My entire life I had worked for everything I had, meanwhile Sophie had been financially rescued dozens of times. Yet somehow I was the greedy one. I turned towards Sophie. She finally spoke. Softly. Sadly. Almost like she was heartbroken. I never thought you'd do something like this. I stared at her. And suddenly everything became clear. The delays. The strange behavior. The lawyer's silence. The documents. The accusations. It wasn't confusion. It was a plan. A carefully designed plan. And Sophie was at the center of it. You did this. The words escaped before I could stop them. Sophie's eyes widened. How can you say that? Because you're lying. Tears instantly appeared in her eyes. I can't believe you're accusing me. My mother immediately wrapped an arm around her. It's okay, sweetheart. Sweetheart. Even then. Even in that moment. They still chose her. I felt completely alone. Outnumbered. Cornered. And worst of all. Unbelieved. Over the next several weeks, the situation became even worse. The attorney's office informed me that concerns had been raised regarding the inheritance. Additional investigations would be required. Legal fees began piling up. Meetings were scheduled. Then postponed. Questions multiplied. Every answer seemed to create new problems. And somehow Sophie always appeared one step ahead. The stress consumed my life. I struggled to sleep. I struggled to focus, I struggled to understand how everything had fallen apart so quickly. Then came the final blow. 3 months later, the attorney called. His voice sounded uncomfortable. Professional. Careful. The way people sound when delivering terrible news. After reviewing the submitted materials, the estate would be temporarily transferred under revised terms until the dispute could be resolved. In practical terms, that meant Sophie gained control. Not half. Most of it. The house. The investments. The assets. Everything. I felt sick. Grandma's final wish had been erased. And somehow nobody seemed willing to stop it. I appealed. I argued. I demanded investigations. But every step required money. Time. Resources. Meanwhile, Sophie continued presenting herself as the innocent victim. Family members began hearing her version of events. The story spread quickly. According to Sophie, I had tried to manipulate Grandma, that I had tried to steal the inheritance. I had become obsessed with money. The lies spread faster than the truth ever could. Relatives stopped calling. Family friends became distant. People who had known me for years suddenly looked at me differently. The worst part wasn't losing the inheritance. It was losing my reputation. One afternoon, I attended a family gathering for the first time since the conflict began. The moment I entered the room, conversations stopped. People looked away. Whispers followed me. The message was obvious. They believed Sophie. Not me. Aunt Rebecca refused to sit beside me. One cousin barely acknowledged my presence. Even people who had watched me grow up now treated me like a stranger. Like a thief. Like a disgrace. That night, I drove home in silence. The rain hammered against my windshield. For the first time in my life, I truly understood what betrayal felt like. Not disappointment. Not rejection. Betrayal. The people who should have known me best had chosen to believe the worst about me. And they had done it without evidence. Without questions. Without hesitation. Exactly as they always had. The inheritance was gone. My family was gone. My reputation was shattered. And Sophie had won. At least that's what everyone believed. What none of them knew was that lies have a weakness. No matter how carefully they are constructed, eventually they begin to crack. And when they do, the truth has a way of destroying everything built on top of them. People often talk about betrayal as if it happens in a single moment. A signature. A lie. A broken promise. But real betrayal doesn't work that way. Real betrayal happens slowly. It spreads through your life like a crack in a foundation. At first, the damage seems small. Then one day you look around and realize everything has collapsed. For me, that collapse began the morning I decided to fight back. I refused to accept what had happened. Grandma's wishes had been clear. The inheritance was supposed to be shared equally. I knew the documents were fake. I knew Sophie had manipulated the situation. And I believed the truth would eventually win. So I hired an attorney. At the time, it felt like the right decision. What I didn't realize was how expensive justice could be. Every meeting cost money. Every investigation cost money. Every legal filing cost money. Within weeks, thousands of dollars had disappeared from my savings. Within months, the number had climbed into the tens of thousands. Still, I kept going. Because giving up felt worse. Giving up meant accepting that Sophie had stolen not only Grandma's estate but also her final wish. I couldn't do that. Not yet. The legal battle consumed my life. I spent evenings reviewing paperwork. Weekends meeting lawyers. Late nights searching through old emails, letters, and records. My apartment slowly transformed into a mountain of documents. Every table. Every chair. Every available surface. Covered in evidence. Covered in hope. Covered in desperation. At first, I believed the process would move quickly. I was wrong. The legal system moved painfully slowly. Months passed. Then more months. Nothing seemed to change. Meanwhile, the bills kept arriving. And then another problem appeared. Work. For years, I had built a successful career in corporate finance. My reputation had always been strong. I was reliable. Professional. Focused. But now my concentration was slipping. The stress followed me everywhere. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't think clearly. I made mistakes. Small ones at first. Then larger ones. One afternoon, my manager asked me into his office. I already knew the conversation wouldn't be pleasant. He closed the door. Folded his hands. And sighed. "Emily, what's going on?" I looked down. "I've been dealing with some family issues." "I know." His voice was kind. Almost sympathetic. "But this is affecting your work." I nodded. Because there was no point denying it. He slid several reports across the desk. Errors. Missed deadlines. Client complaints. Problems that would have been unimaginable a year earlier. We need improvement. I promised him things would get better. I genuinely believed they would. But they didn't. The lawsuit continued. The pressure increased. And my performance continued to decline. 3 months later, I was called into human resources. The meeting lasted less than 15 minutes. When it ended, I walked out carrying a cardboard box that my career was over. At least for now. Losing the inheritance had hurt. Losing my job felt devastating. For years, my work had been the one area of life I could control. Now even that was gone. I spent the next several weeks sending applications. Dozens. Then hundreds. Most never received responses. Some led to interviews. None led to offers. I couldn't understand why. Until a former colleague finally told me the truth. People were talking. The family scandal had spread further than I realized. Rumors followed me. Potential employers searched my name online. They found accusations. Legal disputes. Questions about inheritance fraud. None of it was proven. But suspicion alone was enough. Suddenly I wasn't just unemployed. I was unemployable. The savings account I had spent years building began disappearing. Rent. Utilities. Groceries. Insurance. Legal fees. Every month brought new expenses. Every month the balance dropped lower. I stopped buying anything unnecessary. Then I stopped buying things I actually needed. Eventually I began selling possessions. Jewelry. Furniture. Electronics. Anything that could buy me another week. Another month. Another chance. Meanwhile, Sophie was living a completely different life. Photos appeared on social media. Luxury vacations. Designer handbags. Expensive restaurants. Private resorts. New cars. Weekend getaways. Everything she had ever wanted. Paid for by the inheritance she had stolen. The same inheritance Grandma intended to share equally. Every photo felt like a slap in the face. Not because I wanted her lifestyle. Because I knew where the money came from. One evening, I saw a picture of Sophie standing in front of Grandma's house. The house. The house I used to visit every Saturday. The house where Grandma taught me how to bake cookies. The house where we sat on the porch and watched sunsets. Sophie had renovated it. Repainted it. Replaced the furniture. Removed the flower garden. It looked completely different. As if Grandma had never lived there. As if her memory itself had become inconvenient. I stared at the image for several minutes. Then quietly closed my laptop. Something inside me broke that night. Not my determination. Not my anger. Something deeper. Hope. For the first time, I wondered whether Sophie might actually get away with everything. As the months passed, my world grew smaller. Friends stopped calling. Some were uncomfortable with the situation. Others simply didn't want to be involved. A few openly chose sides. And almost all of them chose the easier side. Sophie's side. The side supported by family. The side supported by appearances. The side that looked successful. I couldn't entirely blame them. People prefer certainty. Even when it's built on lies. One friend I had known since college finally admitted what others were thinking. Maybe you should let it go. I stared at her. Let what go? The inheritance. I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was unbelievable. She stole it. Maybe. Maybe. The word echoed inside my head long after she left. Maybe. After everything. After all the evidence. After all the lies, even my closest friends had begun doubting me. Eventually, the legal bills became impossible to manage. I borrowed money. Then borrowed more. Credit cards filled up. Loans accumulated. Interest multiplied. The numbers became terrifying. Every morning I woke up with anxiety. Every night I fell asleep exhausted. And every day felt heavier than the last. One rainy evening, I sat alone in my apartment reviewing another stack of legal invoices. The balance due stared back at me. The number was larger than my annual salary had once been. For several minutes, I simply sat there. Silent. Defeated. The apartment felt darker than usual. The future felt uncertain. And for the first time since Grandma's death, tears finally came. Not because of the money. Not because of the inheritance. Because I felt completely alone. My family had abandoned me. My career had disappeared. My savings were gone. My friends were fading away. And Sophie was thriving. Or at least that's what it looked like from the outside. What I didn't know was that behind the luxury vacations, expensive purchases, and carefully curated photographs, cracks were beginning to appear. Small cracks at first. The kind nobody notices. The kind people hide. But every empire built on deception eventually develops weaknesses. And somewhere in the distance, karma had already begun its journey. There comes a point in some people's lives when staying becomes more painful than leaving. For me, that moment arrived on a cold November morning. I was sitting alone in my apartment, staring at a city that no longer felt like home. Every street reminded me of something I had lost. Every building carried memories of disappointment. Every familiar face reminded me of betrayal. I had spent nearly 2 years fighting a battle that seemed impossible to win. The inheritance was gone. My career was gone. Most of my savings had disappeared. And the people I once trusted had either abandoned me or turned against me. I felt trapped. Not physically. Emotionally. The life I had built no longer existed. And the future I imagined seemed further away than ever. That morning, I opened my laptop and began searching for opportunities in other cities. At first, it felt ridiculous. Running away wasn't my style. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized something important. I wasn't running away. I was starting over. A week later, I packed everything I owned into a rented moving truck. There wasn't much left. A few boxes of clothes. Some books. A laptop. A handful of personal belongings. Everything else had either been sold or abandoned during the worst period of my financial struggle. As I drove away from the city, I glanced in the rearview mirror one final time. For years, I had hoped my family would eventually choose me. Accept me. Believe me. But some battles aren't worth fighting forever. Some doors only open after you stop knocking. For the first time in a long while, I felt something unexpected. Freedom. The new city wasn't glamorous. It wasn't famous. Most people probably couldn't even point to it on a map. But that's exactly why I chose it. Nobody knew my name. Nobody knew my family's story. Nobody cared about inheritance disputes or old accusations. I was simply another person trying to build a life. And for once, that felt refreshing. The first few months were difficult. I rented a tiny apartment above a struggling bookstore. The place was old. The heating barely worked. And the kitchen was so small that cooking felt like solving a puzzle. But it was mine. For the first time in years, my life felt entirely under my control. I found temporary work helping local businesses manage financial records. The pay wasn't great, but it covered basic expenses. More importantly, it gave me time to think. Time to rebuild. Time to figure out what came next. One afternoon, while reviewing financial reports for a local retailer, I noticed something interesting. The owner had an excellent product, strong customer reviews, a loyal client base. Yet sales remained stagnant. After speaking with him, I discovered the problem. His business had almost no online presence, no digital marketing, no strategy, no growth plan. And he wasn't alone. The more businesses I worked with, the more I noticed the same pattern. Good products, hardworking owners, poor business systems, poor financial planning, poor growth strategies. It felt like an opportunity. At first, the idea seemed impossible. I had no investors, no office, no team, no connections. But then I remembered something Grandma used to say. Sometimes the biggest opportunities arrive disguised as problems. The thought stayed with me. Weeks later, I made a decision. One that terrified me. I used the little money I had left and launched a small business consulting company. At first, it was barely a company. My office was a second-hand desk in my apartment. My conference room was a coffee shop. My marketing budget was practically non-existent. Everything depended on me. Every phone call, every email, every client meeting, every problem, every success, every failure. Especially the failures. And there were plenty of them. The first 3 months were brutal. Potential clients rejected me constantly. Some never returned calls, others canceled meetings. A few openly laughed at my proposals. One business owner told me I looked too inexperienced to help anyone. Another said my company would probably disappear within a year. Those comments hurt. But not nearly as much as the things my family had said. Compared to that pain, rejection felt manageable. So I kept going. Every setback became a lesson. Every mistake became experience. Every failure made me stronger. Slowly, things began changing. 1 client became 2. 2 became 5. 5 became 10. Satisfied customers started recommending me to others. Word spread. Revenue increased. For the first time in years, progress felt real. The turning point arrived almost by accident. A regional manufacturing company hired me to help reorganize its financial systems. The project was larger than anything I had handled before. Failure would be disastrous. Success could change everything. I worked relentlessly. Long days became longer nights. Coffee replaced sleep, deadlines became my entire life. But when the project ended, the results exceeded expectations. The company's profits improved significantly. Efficiency increased. Costs decreased. And suddenly everyone wanted to know who had helped make it happen. Within months, new contracts began arriving faster than I could manage them. I hired my first employee. Then another. Then another. For the first time, I wasn't working alone. The tiny consulting company that began in a cramped apartment was becoming something real. Something sustainable. Something powerful. By the end of the 2nd year, we moved into our first office. Nothing extravagant. Just a modest space downtown. But walking through those doors felt incredible. I remembered all the nights I had spent crying over legal bills. All the mornings I woke up wondering how I would survive another month. All the moments people told me to quit. And now here I was. Building something from nothing. Building something nobody could take away. The growth continued. New clients arrived from neighboring cities. Then neighboring states. Soon, companies were contacting us instead of the other way around. Our reputation grew rapidly. Our team expanded. Revenue increased year after year. By the fourth year, we occupied an entire floor of a modern office building. By the fifth year, we had multiple departments and dozens of employees. And by the sixth year, the company I started from a tiny apartment had become one of the fastest-growing consulting firms in the region. Sometimes I stood in the lobby and watched employees walking through the building. People whose careers existed because of something I created. People supporting families. Building futures. Creating opportunities. The feeling was difficult to describe. Not pride. Not exactly. Something deeper. Validation. For years, people had measured my worth based on what others thought of me. My parents. My sister. My relatives. Now none of that mattered. The success wasn't given to me. It wasn't inherited. It wasn't stolen. I earned every inch of it. One evening, after finishing a meeting with investors, I returned to my office and looked out across the city skyline. The sun was setting. The sky glowed with shades of gold and orange. For a brief moment, I thought about Grandma. I wondered what she would say if she could see everything now. I imagined her smiling, telling me she always knew I would find my way. And maybe she had. Because despite everything I had lost, I had gained something even more valuable. Confidence. Purpose. Independence. The ability to stand on my own. What I didn't know was that while my life was finally moving upward, Sophie's life was beginning to move in the opposite direction. The money she once treated like an endless fountain was running dry. The people she trusted were starting to disappear. And the lies that protected her for years were becoming harder to maintain. For a long time, it looked like she had won. But karma has a habit of arriving quietly. And when it finally arrives, it rarely knocks only once. For years, Sophie believed money solved everything. Whenever she made a mistake, someone else fixed it. Whenever she faced consequences, someone else absorbed the damage. Whenever life became difficult, another rescue appeared. That pattern had followed her since childhood. And after gaining control of Grandma's inheritance, she became even more convinced that she was untouchable. From the outside, her life looked perfect. Luxury vacations. Designer clothes. Expensive restaurants. Weekend trips to exotic destinations. Social media painted the picture of a woman living her dream life. Thousands of people admired what they saw. What they didn't see was the reality hiding behind the photographs. Because while I was building something sustainable, Sophie was spending money faster than she could understand it. The inheritance had given her access to wealth. But it hadn't given her the knowledge to manage it. And eventually, that difference started to matter. At first, the spending seemed harmless. A luxury SUV. A complete renovation of Grandma's house. High-end furniture. Jewelry. Exclusive memberships. None of those purchases worried her. After all, there was still plenty of money left. Or at least that's what she believed. The real trouble began when Sophie decided she wanted more. Having money wasn't enough. She wanted to multiply it. She wanted fast success. Easy success. The kind of success that appears overnight. One evening at a private event, Sophie met a man named Trevor. He was charming, confident, and according to him, incredibly successful. Trevor spoke the language people like Sophie love hearing. Investment opportunities. Passive income. Financial freedom. Exclusive deals that he made wealth sound effortless. Over the following months, they became close friends. And eventually, Trevor presented what he called the opportunity of a lifetime. A luxury property development project. According to him, investors were making incredible returns. All Sophie needed to do was contribute capital. The profits would follow. Any experienced investor would have asked questions, demanded documents, verified information. Sophie did none of those things. Instead, she invested a substantial portion of the inheritance. Nearly $500,000. The money disappeared within weeks. At first, Trevor provided updates. Then fewer updates. Then excuses. Then silence. One day, his phone stopped working. His email became inactive. And his office suddenly stood empty. Trevor had vanished, along with millions of dollars from multiple investors. Sophie's money was gone. Completely gone. The shock was devastating. For the first time in her life, there was nobody to blame. Nobody to manipulate. Nobody to rescue her immediately. But instead of learning from the experience, Sophie doubled down. She convinced herself the loss was temporary. That she simply needed another opportunity. Another investment. Another chance. Desperate to recover what she had lost, she began taking bigger risks. Riskier investments. Questionable business ventures. Speculative projects she barely understood. Each decision made the situation worse. Every loss created pressure. Every setback fueled desperation. And desperate people rarely make good decisions. Meanwhile, the inheritance continued shrinking. Savings accounts emptied. Assets were sold. Expenses remained high. Yet Sophie refused to add just her lifestyle. The expensive vacations continued. The luxury purchases continued. The appearances continued. Maintaining the illusion became more important than maintaining financial stability. By the time she realized how serious the situation had become, it was already too late. The inheritance that once seemed endless had nearly vanished. Then came the debt. At first, it was a credit card balance. Then another. Then personal loans. Then business loans. Then borrowed money from friends. The numbers grew rapidly. Interest accumulated. Payments became difficult. Stress became constant. For years, Sophie had lived without consequences. Now they arrived all at once. Collection notices began appearing. Phone calls became relentless. Final warnings arrived in the mail. The pressure intensified every month. And naturally, she turned to the people who had always protected her. Our parents. At first, they tried helping. A loan here. A payment there. A temporary solution. But Sophie's problems were no longer temporary. They were structural. The result of years of bad decisions. Yet my parents continued trying to save her. They drained retirement savings. Liquidated investments. Refinanced parts of their property. Anything to keep Sophie afloat. The irony would have been funny if it weren't so tragic. The same people who once accused me of being greedy were now sacrificing their financial future to support the daughter who had already inherited a fortune. Still, they refused to acknowledge reality. They continued believing Sophie was simply unlucky. That circumstances had treated her unfairly. That someone else was responsible. Anyone except Sophie. As the months passed, their own finances began deteriorating. The construction business my father had spent decades building started struggling. Economic conditions worsened. Several major contracts fell through. Unexpected expenses appeared. Revenue declined. For the first time in years, serious financial concerns entered their lives. Under normal circumstances, they might have survived. But supporting Sophie accelerated the damage. Money flowed out faster than it came in. Debt increased. Savings decreased. The pressure became overwhelming. My mother eventually returned to full-time work. My father postponed retirement. Neither of them admitted how serious things had become. But people noticed changes. Friends noticed. Neighbors noticed. Relatives noticed. The family that once appeared financially secure was quietly falling apart. And still, nobody contacted me. Nobody apologized. Nobody acknowledged what had happened. Years earlier, they had chosen a side. Now they were trapped by that choice. One afternoon, an old family friend unexpectedly called me. We hadn't spoken in a long time. After exchanging a few polite words, she hesitated. Then she asked a question. "Have you heard about your parents?" I immediately felt uneasy. No. Why? The silence that followed told me everything. Eventually she explained. The debts. The financial problems. The struggling business. Sophie's failed investments. The loans. The growing pressure. When the conversation ended, I sat quietly in my office, looking out at the city skyline. Part of me felt sympathy. Part of me felt sadness. But another part remembered something important. Every warning. Every lie. Every accusation. Every opportunity they had to do the right thing. And every time they chose not to. I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel revenge. Mostly, I felt disappointed. Because none of this had to happen. The inheritance should have brought stability. Security. A future. Instead, greed had transformed it into destruction. And the worst part was that the real consequences hadn't even arrived yet. The money was gone. The debts were growing. The pressure was building. But hidden beneath all of it was something far more dangerous. The truth. A truth buried for years. A truth everyone believed would remain hidden forever. And somewhere, quietly waiting in the shadows. That truth was preparing to surface. For nearly 6 years, the lie survived. Not because it was convincing. Not because it was flawless. But because the right people wanted to believe it. My family believed it because it protected Sophie. Relatives believed it because it was easier than questioning everything they thought they knew. And Sophie believed it because, for a long time, it worked. The inheritance was gone. The estate had been transferred. My reputation had been destroyed. And everyone involved assumed the story was finished. They were wrong. Because the truth has a strange way of surviving. Sometimes it stays buried for years. Sometimes it waits patiently in silence. But eventually, it finds a way to be heard. The first crack appeared on an ordinary Tuesday morning. At the time, I had no idea my life was about to change. I was sitting in my office reviewing reports when my assistant informed me that someone was asking to speak with me. The visitor didn't have an appointment. She seemed nervous. And according to my assistant, she insisted the matter was important. Normally, I would have declined. My schedule was packed. But something about the situation felt unusual. A few minutes later, a woman entered my office. She looked to be in her late 50s. Tired. Anxious. Almost frightened. For several seconds, she simply stood there. Then she introduced herself. My name is Patricia. The name meant nothing to me. Until she continued. I used to work for attorney Michael Reeves. My heart stopped. Michael Reeves. The lawyer who handled Grandma's estate. The lawyer connected to everything. Suddenly, I was paying very close attention. Patricia sat down slowly. Her hands trembled slightly. She looked like someone carrying a burden for far too long. For several moments, she struggled to find the right words. Then she finally spoke. "I think a terrible mistake was made." I felt a chill run through my body. "What kind of mistake?" She swallowed hard. "The documents submitted during the inheritance dispute." I immediately leaned forward. "What about them?" Patricia closed her eyes briefly, as though preparing herself. Then she said the words I had dreamed of hearing for years. They weren't authentic. The room fell silent. I could hear my own heartbeat. For a moment, I genuinely wondered if I had misunderstood. "What did you say?" She opened a folder and carefully placed several papers on my desk. "I didn't understand what was happening at the time," she said quietly. "But after everything that happened, I started reviewing old records." My hands shook as I examined the documents. Internal communications. Archived files. Administrative notes. Information that had never been disclosed during the original proceedings. And buried among those records was something extraordinary. Evidence. Real evidence. Evidence showing that the supposed letters from Grandma had never existed in official estate files before Sophie's involvement. Evidence showing inconsistencies in signatures. Evidence showing alterations. Evidence showing timelines that simply didn't make sense. The more I read, the clearer everything became. The documents used against me had been fabricated. Not misunderstood. Not misinterpreted. Fabricated. For years, I had known the truth in my heart. Now, for the first time, I had proof. I looked up at Patricia. "Why are you telling me this now?" Tears appeared in her eyes. "Because I should have spoken sooner." The guilt in her voice was unmistakable. I kept telling myself it wasn't my responsibility. Then I watched your family fall apart. I watched what happened to your reputation. And I couldn't stay silent anymore. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I asked the question that mattered most. "Can this be proven?" Patricia nodded. "Yes." That single word changed everything. Within days, my legal team began reviewing the evidence. For the first time in years, I felt genuine hope. Not hope built on emotion. Hope built on facts. The investigation moved quickly. Much faster than the original case. Because once investigators started looking closely, more inconsistencies appeared. Then more. Then even more. The forged documents began unraveling piece by piece. Handwriting experts identified discrepancies. Digital records exposed irregularities. Timeline analysis revealed contradictions. What had once appeared convincing now looked increasingly suspicious. Eventually, the evidence became impossible to ignore. The court approved a formal review. The case was officially reopened. The moment I received the notification, I sat alone in my office for several minutes. Staring at the document. Reading it again and again. For years, people told me to move on. To let it go. To accept reality. And now reality was finally changing. Predictably, the news exploded. At first, it spread through legal circles. Then local media picked up the story. Then larger publications became interested. The scandal that had once damaged my reputation now began damaging someone else's. Questions appeared everywhere. Had the inheritance been stolen? Were documents forged? Who benefited? Who knew? Who participated? People who had ignored my side of the story suddenly wanted answers. Reporters started investigating. Relatives started calling. Friends who had disappeared years earlier began reaching out. Some offered support. Others offered apologies. Most simply wanted information. The public narrative was changing. Rapidly. And Sophie could feel it. According to several reports, she became increasingly desperate. Interviews were declined. Questions went unanswered. Statements contradicted previous statements. The confidence she once displayed began disappearing. Because maintaining a lie becomes difficult when evidence starts speaking. Meanwhile, investigators continued uncovering new details. Every discovery made the situation worse. Not just for Sophie. For the entire family. Because the scandal wasn't limited to forged documents anymore. It was exposing years of deception. Years of manipulation. Years of favoritism. The story spread far beyond our town. People became fascinated by it. A granddaughter accused of stealing an inheritance. A family divided by greed. A successful businesswoman fighting for justice after years of silence. The headlines practically wrote themselves. And with every article published, the pressure intensified. For the first time in years, Sophie found herself facing something unfamiliar. Accountability. The same accountability she had avoided her entire life. One evening, as I left the office, my phone rang. The caller ID displayed a number I hadn't seen in years. My mother's number. I stared at the screen. Watching it ring. Watching the name appear. For 6 years, there had been silence. Now, suddenly, she wanted to talk. I already knew why. The truth was no longer hiding. And everyone could see it. Including her. I let the phone ring until it stopped. Then I slipped it back into my pocket and walked toward my car. The night air felt strangely calm. Because deep down, I knew something important. The lie had finally collapsed. But the real consequences were only beginning. And before this was over, someone would have to answer for everything. The truth changed everything. For years, Sophie had built her life on a foundation of lies. Now that foundation was collapsing beneath her feet. The reopened investigation uncovered evidence that could no longer be explained away. Expert testimony confirmed the forged documents. Financial records revealed suspicious transactions. Internal communications exposed inconsistencies that had been hidden for years. And eventually, the court reached its conclusion. The inheritance dispute had been manipulated. The evidence used against me was fraudulent. Grandma's wishes had been deliberately undermined. The ruling sent shockwaves through the entire family. What remained of the inheritance was ordered to be recovered wherever possible. Assets were frozen. Properties became subject to review. Financial penalties followed. Legal consequences followed. Public consequences followed. By then, however, most of the money was already gone. Years of reckless spending, failed investments, and mounting debt had consumed nearly everything. The luxury lifestyle disappeared almost overnight. The expensive vacations ended. The designer purchases stopped. The social circle that had surrounded Sophie began vanishing. Many of the people who once called her a friend suddenly became unreachable. Phone calls went unanswered. Messages remained unread. Invitations stopped arriving. The people who celebrated her success wanted nothing to do with her failure. For perhaps the first time in her life, Sophie stood alone. The irony was impossible to ignore. She had spent years destroying relationships built on trust. Now she discovered what life looked like without any trust left. Meanwhile, my parents were facing their own reality. The financial damage caused by years of supporting Sophie had become severe. Retirement plans disappeared. Savings accounts were depleted. My father's business had been forced to downsize significantly. The comfortable future they once expected no longer existed. But the financial losses weren't what hurt them most. The truth did. Because once the evidence became public, they were forced to confront something they had avoided for decades. Years of deception. Years of lies. And somehow she still sounded surprised by the consequences. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then Sophie finally whispered the words I never expected to hear. "I was jealous of you." The confession caught me off guard. "You were always stronger than me." I stared at her. She continued. "Grandma admired you. People respected you. You earned everything." Her voice broke. And I hated that. The honesty was painful. But it was honesty. At last. For the first time in our lives. She admitted the truth. Not just about the inheritance. About everything. The jealousy. The manipulation. The resentment. The fear. When our conversation ended, we didn't hug. We didn't magically become close sisters. Life isn't a movie. Some relationships cannot return to what they once were. But something important happened that day. The lies ended. And sometimes that's enough. Months later, I visited Grandma's grave. The sun was setting. The same golden light she loved so much spread across the horizon. I placed fresh flowers beside her headstone and sat quietly. Thinking. Remembering. Reflecting. My life wasn't perfect. It never would be. The lost years could never be recovered. The pain would always remain part of my story. But so would the lessons. Because in the end, the inheritance was never the most valuable thing Grandma left behind. It was her wisdom. Her strength. Her belief that character matters more than wealth. That truth matters more than convenience. And that every choice carries consequences. As I stood to leave, I looked at her name one final time. Then I smiled. Not because justice had been served. Not because karma had punished someone. But because I finally understood something. Karma isn't always dramatic. It doesn't always arrive with headlines or court rulings. Sometimes karma is simply this. The liar loses trust. The greedy lose peace. The selfish lose the people who loved them. And the person who refuses to give up eventually discovers their own strength. Sophie thought she had won when she stole an inheritance. But she lost something far more valuable. Her integrity. Her relationships. Her future. And in chasing what belonged to someone else, she destroyed what already belonged to her. As for me, I lost money. I lost time. I lost people I once loved. But I found something far greater. My voice. My purpose. My independence. And a life built on truth. In the end, Grandma was right. The truth may walk slowly. But eventually, it always arrives.